Hello everyone, this is Josh from the Narrate team. This past weekend was the final part of Narrate's series, Withwards. To end the series, Adam asked the question, why did Jesus choose relationship as a means of delivery? Enjoy the podcast.
What I want to do this morning is we're going to finish up this series called Withwards that we started a few weeks ago. I want to finish this up this morning, and then we're going to do a few one-off messages for the next few weeks, which I'm excited about because those always play a strategic place. And then on Easter, we're going to kick off a faith and science conversation, which should be a lot of fun and a little crazy, and we might even create empty seats. I'm not sure. Wouldn't be the intention of it, but you know, the data now would be that the number one reason why people, especially young adults and college students in particular, the number one reason why people are leaving faith is the human origin conversation. And so it seems to me that as a church, we have a responsibility not to avoid those conversations, but jump into them and not even say, here's what we have to think about that, but here's the different ways thinking that people are thinking about that. So we're going to start that on Easter. That's a giant tangent. This morning, I want to finish up this conversation called Withwards, where we're exploring relationships and what's the benefit of the right kinds of relationships. And I was supposed to, my whole plan all week was I'm just going to get up there and open John and read it and ask a question. And now I've talked for 35 minutes and I still haven't done anything. So in John chapter 1, verse 43, I'm going to read this way. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. Now, lots of context missing there. If you were to recognize that, wait a minute, we must have already met Philip, and there must be this place called Galilee that John's already introduced us to. But this is the right way to study the Bible. You just open up to it, no context, don't pay attention to any of that. You just make that verse mean what it's supposed to mean. So it's a joke, by the way. We're not going to do context here, though there is context, but really the context is we've been introduced to a guy named Philip, and the question that I want to ask this morning is why? Why does Jesus say to a guy named Philip, follow me? Now, I think the longer you've hung around church and the more familiar you are with the Bible, the more difficult it can be to consider this question, because that Jesus called disciples is among the most cliche known things about Jesus. In fact, even if you don't have anything to do with Jesus, or you have something you're here, or you don't want to have anything to do with Jesus, or you've spent very little time in church, you know that Jesus called disciples. But the question that I still want to ask this morning is why? Lest we take the why for granted, why did Jesus do this? And here's part of the trick this morning. I think, listen, okay, so we've worked really hard to create a community and a movement and gatherings where it's safe to not agree with us theologically. We've said from the very beginning, you don't have to follow Jesus. We want to create conversations that invite you to give consideration to who he is and what he's about. But this morning, I think this question's all the more helpful if you actually do pretend, even for the next 20 minutes, that you believe. And the reason why I say that, so many different tangents. My brain is going in so many different directions. Way too much caffeine this morning. I'm very sorry. But here's why I think that's important this morning, is because if you would just stop and consider what Jesus claims to be the Son of God, to be the single most important life that's ever been lived, to be God and humanity in the flesh, to be the restoration of what Israel was said to have accomplished or supposed to have accomplished, that the cross happened, that the tomb was emptied, that he carried this historic message. If all that's true, like maybe think of it this way. He had the cure for cancer and he didn't write it down. That to me is the astounding piece that we have to consider. If his life was anywhere close to as important as we say that it was, why did he call disciples? And why didn't he do a host of things that most highly intellectual people who discover really important things do? He didn't do any of it. Why did Jesus call Philip? So my point is if you'll just pretend, even if you don't, for 20 minutes that you believe, then I think the profound implications of that can be thought and considered more fully, which means really what we're going to do this morning at church is what any church does every weekend. We're all going to pretend that we all believe the same things. Okay? And then it'll be safe. Because certainly that never happens. Okay, so next one. Last week, I recognized that, when you start saying things out loud and you realize, wait a minute, I've got a tick there. I realized that I've become sensitive these last couple months to referring to Jesus and the disciples as Jesus and the guys. Remember I made that horrible first-person pronoun joke or male pronoun joke and it didn't make any sense at all. And it was, wait a minute, there's something going on here for me because for years I've referred to Jesus and the disciples as Jesus and the guys. And I suddenly have a problem with that, and here's why. Listen to Luke chapter 8. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. The 12 were with him. So notice 12 is capitalized. So we're talking about men here who have some historical significance in relationship to the 12. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Johanna, the wife of Huza. I might have to take a Greek class next year, and then I'd be able to pronounce these correctly, but I'd also be really bored, so I'm hoping I don't have to. The manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. So it's like, hey, how was school today? Fine. What'd you do? Same. Jesus, how many women were a part of your small band of followers? Many others. Thank you for being so descriptive. It's so empowering. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Here's why I stumbled, because apparently, and you see this come out consistently in the narratives, especially beyond Jesus' resurrection, especially when you're talking about the leadership within Paul's church, what you see is that Jesus had this crew of women who were also not technically a part of the 12, the disciples, and there's cultural reasons for that, but that were followers of his. Now, all that is this kind of gender tangent to ask this question: why? Why did Jesus ask the women named here and apparently others to spend the next 3 years of their life following him around? Like, why did he do that? Do you see how there's this like, wait a minute, if we just pause long enough, we go, why did he do that? As opposed to all the other things he could have done. Now, one of the barriers I think we have to knock down is the suggestion that Jesus is a social creature like you and I are social creatures, and thus he needed people around him. Because we are social creatures, right? Like, one of the worst forms of punishment continues to be isolation. I have a friend who says even introverts, they like to be alone, but they don't like to be lonely. There's a big difference. We like to be around people. Is that why Jesus did this? Because they're just like, well, I got to go do all this important stuff, but it'd be nice to have dinner with somebody, so why don't you follow me around while I do all this? Is that why? Now, one of the things that you can do there is just slow down and pay attention to the titles that were used for Jesus. Like, listen to John 11. Here we have Mary and Martha, 2 of Jesus' closest friends, one of whom identifies as a disciple later in this whole gospel, whose brother, who's also a good friend of Jesus, comes down sick. And listen to the message they send. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Question, have any of your buddies, peers, friends referred to you as Lord lately? That would be strange, right? I mean, if the only value you get out of coming to church this morning is you discover that you have friends referring to you as Lord, that would have been a worthwhile morning for you. Or it would mean you're in one of those medieval clubs where you beat each other with foam swords. In Matthew 26, there's this, not that there'd be anything wrong with that, I'm just saying, like, that might be normal. In Matthew 26, there's a guy named Judas who, remember, betrays Jesus. And listen to the way Judas refers to Jesus. It says, going at once to Jesus, Judas said, greetings, Rabbi. So again, we've got more than a peer-to-peer relationship is my point. In Mark chapter 10, 2 of Jesus' best friends, they suddenly realize, like, wait a minute, you don't have any assistant coaches yet. Could we be your assistant coaches? Listen to this. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said. So we've got Lord, we've got Rabbi, we've got teacher. We want you to do for us whatever we ask. So what I'm trying to point out here, first of all, is that there's more to it than just the same reason why a student in a middle school who doesn't have friends, why that's like heartbreaking and tragic. That there's more to it than that, because Jesus is referred to as with these very official titles. In fact, one more in Luke 8. Jesus is in a boat with the disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee, and it occurred to me this week, if Jesus ever invites you to get into a boat and cross the Sea of Galilee, the most logical answer is no, right? Because nothing good happens on that trip. Unless, of course, you like seeing him calm storms, and I suppose we could debate what good is, but remember the disciples, they're freaking out. I can't find it. Yeah, I'm in Luke 8. Oh, I'm in 7. Okay. The disciples went and woke him saying, Master, Master, we're going to drown. So why does Jesus call disciples, and could it be that there's more to it than this idea of simple need for community, though need for community is itself legitimate? Several years ago, actually after I graduated, I think I've told this story before, which makes me that guy who's now recycling stories, but lots of you are new, so you won't know. But when I graduated college, we had some friends, Teresa and I, that we spent a lot of time with. They helped us start the youth ministry. Their names were Kyle and Tanya Ketchum. They were a few years ahead of us in marriage. They weren't in college, so they could actually afford to buy dinner and things like that. And they had us over for dinner after we graduated, and he surprised me with this like $500 gift of everything that I would need to learn to fly an RC airplane. Now, there was some context there. He and I had talked about, like, I always wanted to learn how to fly RC airplanes. I thought I wanted to be a pilot at one point, and then I realized flying's scary, but standing on the ground and flying's not. And flying with students would be fun. So he bought me this airplane. So we had, what friends do. They're like, hey, we're going to build this thing together. We're going to do this together. And it was my friend Kyle and my friend Greg and I, we one Saturday got together and started putting this thing together. And we didn't know, needing directions. And we kind of started doing this thing. And then, as life happens, it ends up in the closet because that's the same place your canoe is and your fishing pole, right? Like, life happens, and we got busy. And then there was a Saturday where my wife was working, and I don't know what happened, but I decided, I'm going to try to start this thing today. So I hauled it out. We lived in this basement apartment, and I hauled it out on this little concrete patio thing around the Cocker Spaniel. We had this Cocker Spaniel lived above us that, went to the bathroom in front of our front door. Anyway, that's a tangent, too. But I went around that and upstairs. Maybe that's why we don't have a dog. And I decided I was going to start the thing. So I fueled it and got it ready to start. And my mechanical skill is a negative. And so when I started it, it made sense to me that if you're going to try to start something, you'd want to make sure that it starts. And so I just put the throttle to full. And so when I started it, it went from not started to I'm ready to fly, like that. And so it took off. Well, I had a friend who was an ER doc, and he said, Adam, be careful with that thing because you don't know how many severed fingers I see from RC airplanes. And so when it started to go, I reached over to turn the radio over, and I just turned the throttle down, and I drug my hand through the propeller. And when you look at your hand and something really sharp cuts it, and you can see the cut, and then you can see the blood start to happen, but you don't. And so then what do? You just bury your hand in your shirt, right? So I just put it in my shirt, and I just I don't want to look, I don't want to look, I don't want to look, and your fingers throbbing, and you're not sure how many fingers are there. And anyway, eventually I figured out I didn't cut my finger off, but I did wreck my hands pretty good. So after that, I'm like, this thing's going in the closet. Put it in the closet. Winter happened. Next spring came about. And you know how spring brings, you're going through it right now, right? Spring comes along and it's I'm going to plant tulips and I'm going to change the mulch and I'm going to get new windows and I'm going to paint the house and I'm going to clean them. Remember, you get all motivated on days like yesterday and then July happens and you're like, I didn't do any of that. I think I went and bought some mulch. So I had that, I'm going to learn to fly that thing this year. And so we went out, I think at that point we actually had our oldest, and we went out to the airfield where people actually fly these things and started asking around hey, is there anybody who can teach me to fly? Anybody who can teach me to fly? And eventually they introduced me, we met a guy named Virgil, and I think he was in his lower 80s, upper 70s, lower 80s. He was a veteran of the Battle of the Bulge. Remember him telling me that story? Not one, but several times. And it was actually a really good experience. He drove this 1913 Dodge Caravan that he just crammed full of airplanes. And then his wife Mary would come out with her oxygen and her walker, and they'd just stand there, and it was the sweetest thing. So I'm explaining to him what we're going to do, what I want to do, and then he must have picked up on my lack of mechanical acumen. And so he said, tell you what, you should probably bring that to my house, and I'll kind of look it over and see if the thing is flyable, whether or not you've ruined it. So I brought it over to him. And I guess a week later or something, I called him and I said, hey, Virgil, how's that airplane? And don't be offended. Well, dang it, I did that at the 8:30. You should never start by saying don't be offended. But he said, Adam, 3 words per minute, Adam, you did about as a left-handed a job on that thing as you could have possibly have done. But I think I salvaged it. And for the next 6 weeks or so, we would meet up with Virgil and his wife, Mary, out at the field. And he'd go okay, so Adam, you started on low throttle, and the radio never leaves that side of the propeller because you never want to reach over there. And 20 flights later, I finally soloed for the first time. Now, psychologically, you know what that's called? It's called internalization. Internalization is a psychological principle that says this. Dr. John Townsend, one of the most published and famous and well-respected psychiatrists writing today, he says it this way: people learn nothing outside the context of relationship, for better or for worse. Internalization, I don't know that it's always that black and white, but what it says is the things we learn, the conduit is always relationship. Internalization is what happens when a baby is born and mom starts to soothe said baby, right? And assuming it's not after midnight, dad might also soothe said baby, but after midnight, it's just kidding. I'm only kind of kidding, because there's only so much the guy can do. Right, or caretakers or whoever, there's this upset baby, and mom or dad or caretaker, whoever, takes and begins to soothe the baby. And what happens? Theoretically, at least, what happens? The baby comes soothed. And 3 hours later, or 30 minutes, what happens? The baby's upset again. Thanks, Clay. It's good, though. Oh, yeah, I know. No, this is great. Someday you'll have kids and you'll go, wait a minute, when do you sleep? Just kidding. 30 minutes later, an hour later, 3 hours later, baby's upset again. Mom, dad, caretaker. This is the power of the other, as Dr. Cloud says. This is Withwards. This is internalization. That at that point, the baby, it's receiving a skill from the parent that it doesn't have right now. And ideally speaking, it has it by the time it's adult, and we don't really know until they go off to college and the phone rings. But ideally speaking, the baby is learning something that they're grafting into their DNA, their operating system. This is internalization. Internalization suggests that people learn through modeling, learn through relationship better than any other way. You know, when I was a junior in college, my degree is in secondary education. Never used it. Student taught, went, whoa, this is hard. I think I'll lead a church. Serious, I mean that respectfully. You guys and gals are heroes. But I remember my ed psych class. It was the first class in my program. And I was excited for the class. I knew the instructor. And in first class, she demonstrated herself to be really sharp. In fact, I remember she started the class there were probably 50 of us in there. And she said, how many of you guys liked school? And only in an education curriculum kind of class, do 46 people raise their hand and go, we loved school. And then she said, okay. And I remember she did this in a way that wasn't demeaning towards those 46 at all. But she said, okay, how many of you hated school? And there were like 4 of us that raised our hands. And then she went on to say, she said, you 4, the future hope of education is in your guide. Like the innovation that has to happen is in your hands. And she just went on to explain that because those of us who like school, there's certainly a place for us and there's a value for us in that role. But the reality is we don't see this stuff because we don't see any changes because we liked it. And the 4 of you that hated it, you're the ones that can see the cracks and the crevices, the brokenness, right? It's like when a new person comes on staff somewhere and you're like, okay, for 3 months, you can see the stuff that none of us can see anymore. And I remember walking out of that class going, this lady's sharp and she's not afraid to make people mad. And then she gave us our reading assignment and it was on, and this is to me the weirdest word that I always pause before, pedagogy. It's like the $10 word, right? So pedagogy is the different philosophies of how people learn. And I remember in the book, like the first page was about modeling or internalization. I can't even remember what the technical term was. But in this college secular text, it was explaining that people learn best when they learn it from somebody they have relationship with. And that was like page 1 of 60. And then there were 59 other pages on all the other ways that we can teach people things. And I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute, I think we might have just skipped something. And as kind of a new black and white follower of Christ, there was also this like, wait a minute, this is Jesus. You just described Jesus. We can convert the whole class just on this lesson. So we went back to class, and again, I have a lot of respect for this teacher. And I remember she got into the lecture, and it occurred to me 10 minutes in, like, wait a minute. She just completely skipped the first part, like completely skipped the modeling internalization piece. And I remember raising my hand going, well, wait a minute. Like, you skipped this whole thing where it kind of unapologetically said, this is what works best. And the response was something to the effect of, well, yeah, that's not practical. It doesn't work. And again, I don't say that to be critical of public education at all. In fact, that's the empathy that I have when I interact with teachers and see what you do is there's like, whoa. But that's internalization. Now let me ask you, why did he show up and say to a handful of people, hey, why don't you come follow me? Listen to Hebrews. This is, to me, one of the most brilliant exposés on the nature and character of Jesus in all of Scripture. In Hebrews 1, if you've ever read Hebrews 1, that would mean you've read it but never understood it, because it's such a difficult book to understand. Or maybe you understand. I really struggle with it. But chapter 1, these first few verses are insane. Listen to this. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through their prophets at many times in many ways. In other words, in the past, God used these indirect mechanisms to reveal himself to us. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. Why did he send his Son? The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purifications for sin, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. Let me ask you this, from the perspective of the author of Hebrews, why did Jesus come to the planet? And what was he representing? Could it be that long before psychologists had a phrase, long before they identified this thing called internalization, could it be that this God who shaped and formed went like, wait a minute, I've made people to learn this way? You know, one of the examples that I see of this is, and you may be aware that there's a couple educators, one at HMS and the other at C.R. Anderson, who kind of stuck their hands in the air and went, hey, wait a minute, if you give us the money to host breakfasts for especially at-risk youth at our schools, we'll host the breakfast. So Narrate pays, we cook the food, we'll find the team that'll serve these students. I actually want to watch it. You may have seen this video, but we're going to watch it again.
My name is Jessica Fisher. I am a special education teacher at Helena Middle School, and I work with kids with social and emotional needs. My coworker, Lori Cope, and I really spend a lot of time trying to be intentional with relationships, as does the entire staff here. But we were talking this year about how can we further make a difference? How can we further connect with our at-risk kids and just give them an opportunity to come in and just have positive interactions with adults? I was actually laying in bed one night, not sleeping, kind of stressing about that, and just had this idea to do a breakfast club. Was originally thinking like cereal, kind of basic, really easy, but just kind of a time to connect and be relational with kids. And so I woke up the next morning and I immediately called my coworker Lori and just said, hey, this is my idea. You have a kitchen. Is this something you're on board with? And she was like, yeah, let's do it. Admin is usually a little hesitant with saying yes to my big ideas, but he said, if you can get a way to pay for breakfast, I'm totally on board. You can start whenever you have it. So I immediately went and emailed Adam and Sarah at Narrate and just said, hey, I don't really know what this is going to look like yet, but this is an idea I have, and I think it would make a really big difference. And got a text back with Adam within minutes saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this. I'm really excited. They had met as a church council the night before and had talked about what they could do to make a difference with kids in the community. And so just really cool how God just brought that to my heart and brought it to Narrate's heart. And a week later, I had $250 for Costco from people at Narrate to buy food. The first one we did was in November. We kind of targeted kids that first week and looked at, okay, what are like 20, 25 kids in the building who really, we feel like need more from us, who need that connection. And so we sent out invitations. Several of them came to me, what is this? This is weird, Miss Fisher, what is this? And so we just told them, we just want to eat with you and connect with you. And I would say probably like 10 to 12 came that first week. They were kind of uncomfortable at first and kind of nervous, but seeing their friends around and just loved having the hot breakfast. The hot breakfast was a big deal for them. And at the end of the breakfast, we said, hey, we'll see you next week. And they were all really excited and surprised that we were going to do it every week. And we just told them, invite your friends. We just made a decision early on that we never wanted to say, no, you can't come. We did it every week for the rest of the year. And my parents came every week and cooked it. They have worked with at-risk kids their whole career too, and so they really wanted us to be able to have the time to talk to kids. We had one girl that came at 7 o'clock every week just to talk to us, and other kids who came in on more than one occasion and said, I wasn't going to come to school today, Miss Fisher, but I remembered it was breakfast. And one kid who for 2.5 years had never looked me in the eyes, had never said hi to me, now would stop and talk to me in the hallway. So just those helping kids to feel valued and helping kids to feel like they mean something to somebody. These are our kids that are, hungry. They go home and they don't know if they have a meal. They have parents who are addicts. They live in group homes. They live with an aunt or an uncle. We had one kid who was living at a hotel with his uncle for the last month of school and was walking himself to school to be at the breakfast. So people from Narrate have really helped with that, both with the gift card, but also like my parents coming every week to cook. Also had Cielo. They cooked Mexican tacos for the whole group. Another couple from church brought breakfast the day before Christmas and brought stockings for all the kids filled with snacks. So just little things, but they make a huge difference for kids. So I wanted to say thank you to Narrate and Adam and the staff there for coming alongside of us and supporting this so that we can keep this going for the next year, and just thank you for giving us this opportunity to scatter.
So my motive there is just to ask this question, why do we do that? Right? Like, unless we trivialize the value of a hot meal in some kids' lives, and I get that, is it about the meal? Or is it about a couple educators who are going, wait a minute, this would allow us to relationally connect with these students. And I think the question that we can begin to pull from that is, wouldn't all of our vocations, whether it has us getting a paycheck somewhere or not, begin to permit us to go, wait a minute, what's the win here? And can we really teach anybody anything outside of the context of relationship? You know, one of the thoughts I had last week during the 10 o'clock music, which it's always a good sign for me mentally if my mind is going to next week during the 10 o'clock music, because things taste better when they're marinated. And so that's a positive thing for me just within the process. And it occurred to me last week that if Narrate were to implode, it'll be because of this internalization piece, or the lack thereof. That listen, like you, I love hosting gatherings here. Love the chance to meet in community context, in a building we don't own, where we get to serve, where we get to be a part of this together and create experiences for people where it's not intimidating or daunting to consider Jesus. And there's story after story after story of you who this made Jesus approachable. Love the chance to scatter together. Like the opportunity to go, wait a minute, the difference between us doing Jesus, 8 of us in our living room, and us doing us in this context has a lot to do with our ability to serve other people. And that's not a shot against Jesus in the living room. Like that's very legitimate. But for me, the reason we do this, not that, is because of the opportunity it gives us to collaborate resources and serve a larger number of people. Yesterday was insane. It was incredible. But the question I think we have to ask is, okay, but are we leveraging the reality of internalization? Like, are we recognizing that the discipleship, so to speak, that moving forward in a relationship, whether with God or with anybody, it doesn't just happen by way of a sermon, right? Like, this can serve people, hopefully, sometimes, but not exclusively. And so there's this question of, are you... Are we leveraging the reality of internalization in our work, in our everyday kind of vocation in life, in our desire to know and follow Jesus? To me, there's this challenge of, as you seek to serve God by loving people, are you leveraging internalization? Are you doing, I love Andy Stanley's statement, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Are you allowing enough people close enough to learn the few things that you know, so that they can take it and run with it? And as you seek to raise kids and to be married and to grow vocationally and do all the things that life demands, are you leveraging internalization? Are you seeking people out and begging for their time so that you can learn what it is they know? Is internalization a reality? See, here I think is the question. Why Philip? Why those women? Why not a book, right? That's what most people who come up with really important ideas do, is they write them down. Jesus didn't do any of that. That's not to say things didn't get written down, but he didn't do it. Why not start some kind of an organization or an education center? That's what most people who have really important things to teach other people, like when someone develops a whole new medical strategy, what they do is they teach that to as many people as possible in an academic setting. Why didn't Jesus do that? I mean, could you imagine if we had 20 bullet points from Jesus about here's what really matters, which we do. I know there's some controversy there, but I mean literally, like penned by him. Can you imagine? But he didn't do any of that, which would mean this: no matter what your comfort level with Jesus, no matter whether you follow him or not, like your being here today says his method worked. Because if we could trace relationally the last 2,000 years behind you, we couldn't trace it back to a book or a school or a piece of whatever that's called, stone tablet or reed thing. What is papyrus? Why can't I say that anymore? We couldn't do any of that. What we would trace it back to is one of those 12 dudes or those handful of women who Jesus went, in me is contained all of life. Everybody who will ever walk on this planet depends upon me. What I know, everybody would benefit from knowing. I love the way Andy Stanley says that following Jesus makes you better at life, or makes your life better and makes you better at life. Your being here says that his method worked because the only thing he did was pour into some people. We're going to hear one more story about that and just give you a chance to, I think the way, really what this is it's an audit. It's a chance, not with a bony finger, but just a chance to go, am I leveraging internalization in my life, both for my benefit and for others? God, thanks for the astounding community of people that gather on Sundays to wrestle with you and what they're about. Thanks for the lives that they're leading and the people that they love and the kids that they're raising and the friends that they're serving and the roommates that they have. And God, in the busy, hectic nature of life, would you give us the type of supernatural insight that just helps us to slow down, to give us the courage to do for one what we wish we could do for everyone, that learns about things like marriage and parenting, not just by reading books, but by sitting across from the people who have done it for a little bit longer than us. Jesus, in this hectic world where all of our lives are different and thus there's not a formula for how we get into these corner 4 relationships, would you give us wisdom and the courage to step forward in relationship and step into these corner 4 relationships? We love you.
My name is Janelle Williams. As a kid growing up, I had a very unique experience with church. My brother was struggling with Asperger's syndrome that went undiagnosed for a long time. So attending church was a struggle. Going in public anywhere really was a struggle. So attending church was kind of something that we did sporadically, and eventually just became a conclusion that it just wasn't really for our family as a kid. But when I was in 8th grade, I started to attend church with a neighbor. I remember something special about going with them, and a few months after we started going, I decided to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And I remember a very calming sense of, just peace that came into my heart when that happened. And it helped to put things into perspective, which was a really wonderful gift, being in junior high and high school, and just the struggles that you have as a teenager. Just having Jesus in my life during those times was really beneficial, super wonderful to have. But I think that the really big thing in my life with Jesus was when I reaffirmed my desire to be a follower instead of an admirer, and to make a very intentional move to become a follower of Jesus. And that happened in college when we started to attend another church. And it was a real turning point because it made me make sure that I was setting a good example in my faith for my husband and for my kids, and making sure that they knew that this was a big priority in my life and that it was important that they know that and that they see that. And finding Narrate was such a blessing because it is the place that I come to really just take a breath, and to hear God's word through music is just one of the most important things that I think has happened in my life, and it just becomes a really special place for me. So I want to thank Kate for being a real mentor for me since coming back to Narrate, being able to pray with her and learn about music and the word, and just having that opportunity to, just chill with her once a month. And she's become such a wonderful friend of mine. So I want to thank her so much for that. I'm really excited to share that I believe that Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and I was so excited to be baptized. So.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.